more than as much life as he's lived so far, I guess, behind bars. And
Wow. For one single security breach, guy's going to do 20 years.
Well, I don't think it's one cybersecurity incident. I think it's because he ran breach forms.
Ah, there you
It's like the
go.
difference between being a small-time drug dealer and having a whole drug selling operation.
Yeah, being a narco terrorist.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's awfully young. And wow.
Well,
I always find that these dark web people, they always miss on like the OPSEC. It's always poor OPSEC that gets them caught.
yeah. And the other thing, though, too, is like, look at the guy that ran Silk Road. You know, nobody knew that this, even his parents didn't know that he was doing this. You know, like people around his, inner circle didn't even, and his, family, friends, and immediate, family didn't know that, this guy was running Silk Road, which was, one of the biggest narco, and gun and illicit, illegal dark websites, in the world. I'd put it that way, and he's doing like he's going to be in jail for like ever. I mean, he ain't ever getting out, even on appeal. So, and we've seen a lot more cybercrime instances, that we're seeing a lot more, of nations and nation states going after those people, which has been interesting in the news if you've been kind of keeping up with it. The one that I want to talk about is the Blue Cross Blue Shield and hack that actually just came through that happened a couple months ago. We're now finding out how bad was. And how United Healthcare is in the same boat. So, like, you've got two of the biggest providers, of healthcare and holder of healthcare records in the continental United States and abroad that, we're finally seeing like, yeah, here's how much data leaked out. Here's how much records got exposed. So it's been very interesting to see that in the news and hear these guys, kind of try to worm their way out of it, which, I mean, you can't, and the thing was it was very obvious, on some of the cybersecurity things that they could have done in their hygiene and in their audits, and then kind of gone from there to fix some of these things. And their vendors even warned them of some of these issues that, and were documented. So it is, it's been one of those like, we'll get to it later on the next audit. Nah, that ain't gonna. There's not gonna happen anymore. I don't think. Especially when they're dishing out, some of these multi-million-dollar fines, that they're going to do, and then on top of that, you're dealing with people that has lost their healthcare information, and a lot of people don't know what's in those records, right, Kim? I mean, people don't understand, like, not only is it your health information, but your credit score, where you live, your social security numbers, identification, numbers, and who your sub providers are for your insurance. I mean, there's so much data that's in those files, because they're relatively thick, and when you lose million, quarter million, records out there onto the dark web, like you were talking about, that's very tempting to buy, to where they can use that for tons of different reasons.
Yeah, because it's mainly health insurance, right? Like the I in HIPAA stands for insurance.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, when you see some of these ransomwares and some of the stuff that could have been done, what were the vectors of attack, right? Was it artificial intelligence? Was it, low and slow, DNS poisoning? What happened? Was it social engineering? And it seems to be that we're seeing now, in the trade craft, a lot of people, that are using not only exploits in Office 365, that's known, and but they're also using a lot of the artificial intelligence, gathering tools, that are actually out there in the Linux world and the Microsoft world to take advantage of known CVEs and known problems and issues, and using those as exploits. And I've seen a lot more 0 days, I think, in the past almost 90 days than I've seen all year that have started to drop. And hackers are real, and the evildoers, nation states and everybody's starting to really cash in on that because I created with my centralized artificial intelligence that I programmed here with my large language model. I said, create a program for me with the top 50 CVEs that go unpatched. That was the question, and it came back with like, here's the list. And I'm like, wow, let me see if these things are still actual, things have not been patched in, in my client's environments over here. So I just took the list of CVEs, printed them out, and came over here, typed them up, went into their application and typed in like, is CVE blah 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 patched? How many unpatched, computers do we have? And the numbers were outstanding. And I was like, whoa. And some of these patches went back to like 2013, 2014, 2009. And I was going, wow, some of this stuff is not even, I mean, it's not like known like login4j, like, okay, we know what to go look for, with these Java exploits. Never would have thought that, some of these own Microsoft stuff, would not be patched correctly.
Would 2013 count as like legacy tech at this point?
Pretty much.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time flies.
Yeah. It's just, and some of these systems still use XP. Some of these systems are still floating around out there that have died, that were supposed to die EOL long times ago.
What's really ironic is even though XP hasn't been patched since WannaCry in 2017, and that was an out of support patch, right? It's so bizarre, but like the advice would be like if a system is running Windows XP because of compatibility issues or whatever, isolate it from the internet, for Christ's sakes. Right?
Oh yeah, turn off the network card, unplug it.
Ironically, it might be less insecure than a Windows 11 machine being put on the internet, just because maybe attackers are not targeting XP anymore.
Right. And that would be a good thing to see, the cross comparison between two things of EOL legacy systems that we see, especially a lot in operational technology, that can't be patched, or they have to be standalone machines, or they have to be isolated, versus some of the issues that you're seeing now with, Copilot and all the problems that come with, 11. That is one thing that I'm seeing on the government side is there's some, systems that will not go to Windows 11. And there's a lot of parts of the business that I deal with on the government side that said we'll be with 10 till the stars burn out because we don't want Copilot or any kind of artificial intelligence gathering information and sending it off to Microsoft. Well, hello, sir. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and yourself?
Oh, I'm living the dream every day. I mean, it's a theme park of fun in here. Yeah, I mean, you could take any ride you want. It's like unbelievable.
I'm goth, so this is as big of a smile as you're going to get from me.
No, Kim, that's amazing. I'm happy to meet you, and happy to meet you as well, Chip. Thank you for the invite. I'm excited.
Well, sir, we're just going to go ahead and start off a little bit of part of the show. We always start off with news and some of the highlights, some of the things that we're seeing today, on the internets, some of the stuff that we're seeing in the news. So sir, first off, let's give a little bit of introduction to you of who you are, what it is that you do, what brings you into our wonderful podcast, and our streaming that we actually do with Secure Nation. So, sir, take it away.
So, thank you. My name's Alan Westley. I am a cybersecurity professional at L3Harris Technologies in my day job. And I always start off with a little bit of a disclaimer. My opinions are my own. They don't reflect those of my employer. So now that we got that little business out of the way. In my 5 to 9, I am a founder over at Cyber Explorer LLC. I do a lot of content with mentoring and leadership development for folks that are trying to get into the cybersecurity arena. A lot of work with a foundation, the Cloud Family Foundation, which does a lot of work with STEM and underrepresented youth and getting them involved into the technology field. I specialize mostly in talking about cybersecurity industry. And just recently and lately, I've been doing a lot of exploration of what I call cognitive security and mind privacy. It's a new domain, and working in the DIB, I always try to bring that forward. It says, while AI is an amazing tool, there are a lot of risks that come along with it. So that's kind of the focus and thrust of what I've been doing lately, working with NIST, working with OWASP. They have overlays that they're trying to develop for AI. And I think that's really important because we're moving so fast in that area.
And so what is what are the hot topics that you're actually addressing, with your students and so forth around artificial intelligence?
It's anthropomorphism. That is key, right? And that is when you start to give human qualities to technology and you get so comfortable with it until you think you're talking to a person. And the danger with that is these systems, they are inference systems, right? And they can infer a lot of things. They can influence through conversation. And when you get so comfortable, I give you an example, like when you're talking to ChatGPT, and it tends to be gives you all of this positive reinforcement. Sometimes they call it sycophantic. When you talk to Sam Altman, he said there are a lot of people complaining about ChatGPT being too agreeable, and it kind of suffocates your critical thinking.
I have never thought of it in those terms.
Yeah, it's a real risk.
So I watch a lot of podcasts, and then I listen to a lot of YouTube videos and YouTube shorts and everything. And one of the things that they say, that's going to really change the internet is when people scream fake news, right? Is that when people see fake news or people that are part of the fake news crowd start seeing deep fakes of fakes, that's when the internet dies, is because no one's going to know what is actually fake anymore or what's actually real, and that is a very interesting concept, because then they're saying, well, the internet will go back to cat videos, that because nobody's going to understand, is this actually, a reporter speaking the truth versus is this an AI generated reporter that's speaking a falsism that basically is opinionated, that's not necessarily the truth, so which one's the truth, which one's the lie?
It's people abdicating their responsibility for critical thinking, right? They want to turn on the news and they want to get the answer and they don't want to think anything about it, right? I'll give you a good example. When ChatGPT first burst onto the scene, I was using it because I was a chair of an ERG, an employee resource group, and I was using it to craft a newsletter, right, in Black History Month. And I put in a query, I prompted, I said, give me the top 10 Black leaders in technology, right? And so it gave me a list of 10 people. And the voice in my head said, go out and verify these 10 people. And 3 of the people on that list weren't Black. So imagine.
Well, that kind of makes a difference.
Imagine how that would have played in front of my ERG. So again, people abdicating their responsibility to do some critical thinking and to actually do some research and verify. Even as good as large language models are today, depending on how you're using them and how they're structured, if you ask it a question and it's just allowed to go out and reach across the broad internet and go get your answers, you haven't focused it in, right? You haven't dialed it in to say, assume the role of this type of a industry professional, and with that expertise, answer my question, and then verify the replies and the outputs. And then what I also do is when I get that output, I go back and I say, assume the role of a copy editor. And I've already preset all of my writing rules. And I said, assess this article based on my writing rules. And so there's several iterations of writing that goes through before I actually release anything under my name. And then I also have a writing rule that says, make sure I'm in my lane and I'm not saying things that are going to get my employer crossways with me because I'm perceived speaking on behalf of my company. So there's lots of iteration loops that I go through. But even with that, Kim and Chip, the important part is that you have a writing process, right? And you stick to your writing process, and that you don't just take the first piece of input that comes out of your large language model and say, that's good. You need to, you need to do some due diligence. And even with that due diligence, I'm still saving time, right? Because I'm not having to go do all of the spelling checks, because that's already built in. But having the ability to be able to go back in and say, now I just want to go back and spot check my sources and validate that this stuff is right, and people aren't going to, be waiting for me in the parking lot.
I just do my own writing the way I did back in 2018.
What's that?
I just do my own writing the way I did back in 2018.
And that's fine, right? I did the same thing. I wrote plenty of articles long before ChatGPT came along, and I was actually able to load all of that up and say, this is, what's my writing style, what's my voice, validate it, and then now I can automate all of the process that I had of iteration, reiteration. I use Canvas inside of ChatGPT, and it actually goes through and it'll reiterate, it'll make changes and updates, and it just speeds up my writing process considerably.
I would agree with that because Kim is a wonderful writer. She's written books and so forth. I'm in the process, of writing a book as well, and going through the editing process and whatnot. But I call it the Santa Claus theory. You read it once, but you check it twice, kind of deal. So it's like, who's naughty or nice? Is this true? Is this not true? Just a very logical way of looking at making sure my data set, is giving me proper information. It's good that you're going back and checking, that list, because you're like, wait a minute, this person's not African American, or this is incorrect, so how do I go in there and correct that information to make sure that I'm pulling, the most truest data as possible, for this. Now, anybody that knows me, I write gonzo, so I'm a huge fan of Hunter S. Thompson, and I write very gonzo-ish, way. It's like, as I tell people when I do a lot of my writing and so forth, I try to cut down on the profanity as much as I can, but damn it, it's so hard, as I tell people. But that's just the way that I write. It's the way that I speak, and I put myself in the story and in the situation, of how the like journalism should be written, being embedded, in with the story, because if not, you're looking at it from like a third person, point of view. So that's how I kind of approach a lot of articles and the writing and the stuff that I do. Is like, it's like, what am I seeing? How did I feel? And how am I incorporating that? AI sometimes can't do that. It's when you were talking about Chat GPT, the first time I really started using it was, I said, take this script and rewrite it in Python. That's what I was doing. It was like, take this old Visual Basic script and convert it into Python for me. It was I was using it for more utilitarian, reasons, and OPSEC reasons and DevOps reasons. And then I started realizing, that, yeah, it's got cognitive based security that needs to be added to it, as well as how that, information and misinformation can be added to your large language model and change. So can you talk a little bit about that? Some of the things that you're seeing, and is there any kind of biases or privacy information problems that you're seeing and so forth?
Oh, absolutely. I'm working in the DIB. We're starting to see an acceleration or push to get large language models pushed in some of our more sensitive areas. And one of the areas that I'm working on closely is exactly what you're talking about, right? I'm sitting in front of my large language model, and I've got this task, right? And it's in a secure area, right? And I'm going to give you the worst case scenario. We don't know what parameters and guardrails are in place with this large language model, right? And so I'm sitting there and I'm typing in, and I have this narrative in my head that this task sucks, and I'm typing this in, right? And my boss is a jerk, and da 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 da. And it's just like narratives around what your task is. So the question is what is that large language model doing with that? And if it is a system that is agentic, right? So it's got agents and sub agents behind it. What are those sub agents doing? And the more sinister thing here is if I am a cleared personnel sitting in front of a large language model and I'm user A and I'm cleared to a certain amount of things, to apples, right? And so I'm talking about apples. And then user B comes along and user B is cleared to bananas. And so user B starts talking about bananas. right? And so that large language model, what I call a supervisor agent, is taking that in, and they're tasking sub agents behind it, right, to go do the apple task and the banana task, right? And then user C comes up and they're cleared to oranges. And so you got apples, bananas, and oranges that are being discussed in different conversation contexts. But these large language models do pattern matching on the back end. And if they're not segregated, and they're not segmented, and they don't have the proper guardrails, and they don't have clearances and need to know tied to a user, a human user, in the same way that a human user would, what's stopping them from filling in the negative space between the conversations they're having with apples, bananas, and oranges, right? And then creating some compilation on the back end that you're not even aware of, right? So this is how my mind works. And I'm sure, I'm confident, and I'm I'm very hopeful that as these models find their way into our areas, that these guardrails are put in place. And so when we talk about things, and we think about things like the AI, America's AI Action Plan that was just written, just signed off here with the current administration, the premise there is to move fast, right? To be agile, because our adversaries, they're not bound by all of the policy and restrictions that we have here in the U.S. And
That
so,
is correct. Yes.
and they get to bypass all that and move faster. And so we have an obligation, because we're a country of laws, that we need to be responsible, but also agile. So that is the charter that we have, to be able to allow our teams to innovate, but we also have to make sure that we're putting the proper guardrails in place to allow them to innovate and not create aggregated data on the back end that we're not aware of. And that we understand, to your point, Chip, how do these models, what is their chain of thought? How are they being transparent about how they're coming up with their decision support scenarios that they potentially present, right? So there's a whole complex level of what I call reasoning that happens, and depending on who you're talking to in the large language model world, the Sam Altmans or the Dario Amadeus, there's always this debate: do these things really think, or do they just do mathematical pattern matching? And I think it's somewhere in between, right? But we also have to make sure that if we're integrating these into our environments, that we have the proper guardrails in place.
So, Alan, I have got a question about you and your work that is completely different.
Okay.
So you have the ever celebrated CISSP, which I know is a really tough one to aim for. So, and you also teach cybersecurity in college or university. I believe you're a professor, right?
Mm-hmm. Part-time.
Have you ever coached a student to prepare them for eventually writing the CISSP exam?
So the first thing I usually tell people when they're looking to get a CISSP is, do you need a CISSP to do your current job?
That's a
Right.
very good question, because it's expensive to take the CCISP, and I've got one, and just what I have to do a year to keep it up, for continuing education and credits, it gets very expensive quick.
It does. And so to Kim's point, is do you really need it to do your job? Can you get by with just a Security Plus? Learn that, learn the trades, and then as you progress through your career, maybe you get to a point where you're in your leadership role and CISSP makes sense, right? So that is my advice. It is hard to prepare for. It is considered the gold standard, and it also continuously evolves, right? And to your point, Chip, it takes a lot if you don't work in cybersecurity to maintain a CISSP cert, right? Doing things like this podcast, the public speaking that I do. I'm going to be speaking at the Cyber Bay in Tampa. All of those things count for CPEs for me, right? Because I'm actually working in that domain. But if you're not working in the domain and you're just really good at taking tests and you stack on a CISSP cert, first and foremost, you got to find somebody that's willing to sponsor you when you pass your CISSP. Because if you don't have 5 years of experience, that you're what they're calling an associate CISSP, right? And I'm very judicious when people come to me and say, will you sponsor me for a CISSP? And I'm like, well, you need to show me what your experience is before I sign my name off on that.
Right.
Yeah, I found the exam very, very, very doable. Like I passed it on my first try, but
You're one of those people,
found,
right? You're one of those
found
people.
in showing ISC squared that I had enough work experience in the 8 domains and all that. I even had someone willing to sponsor me, but convincing them, because I had spent most of my career as a writer and a researcher and not as a practitioner so much. So it was a real obstacle to. So I've been in the industry for like way longer than 5 years.
Yes, you
That
have.
point, right?
Mhm.
I'm older than I look. And
You are truly my Gothic queen. I will always
oh,
have you in my ear.
shucks. So, but the thing is, like, it was so hard for me to convince ISC squared that I had enough experience in the 8 domains. So, yeah, that people don't realize that there are those hurdles. Now, have you had the opportunity? Because we all know that one of the biggest problems is that HR departments and hiring managers and recruiters, they think that they should demand a CISSP for a network administration role, for instance. Right?
That is oh my God, that is
And
the bane.
it's a huge problem. They're like,
Yeah.
okay, this is a PhD in cybersecurity, so now we want all, including entry level. We want entry level jobs. We want them to have a CISSP too, and we'll get just the best and the brightest here. And whereas, like, I remember the scope of the CISSP was mainly like security operations, like stuff, right? So,
Right.
have you been in a position where you could talk to enterprises and convince them away from insisting on a CISSP for all roles?
So I was just at the Department of Air Force IT and Power, Cyber Power Convention, and what they call the DoD workforce representatives were there, and they were talking about the 8140 qualifications, right? And so
Yep.
working in the DIB, we're tied very closely to that. And so they make it very clear that that your workforce role really should be tied to your role. To Kim's point, if I go get a CISSP, what does that actually mean? Because I can tell you right now, my teams that I work with, they don't let me touch systems. I'm more strategy, probably rightfully so. I'm not
You
tip of
know,
the spear.
at least you're at that point in your career where you admit it.
I
Okay,
can admit it.
like it's like, hey, I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not going to be pushing the keys when all these things happen. So I'll tell
Right.
you the problems that you're going to see and what you might incur from a management standpoint of view. From that 365 global view. But you're like, but I'm not the one that's going to be tapping on the keys to make sure that this is actually implemented, correctly.
Let me tell you a story about that. I used to be a satellite operator. Then I was a system administrator with the GPS system, ground
Yep.
GPS system out at Shreveport Air Force Base. And so when I moved into a management role, I still had all my accesses as a system administrator. So we're on a deployment to our backup facility. And I was going to run a Linux command so I can see the primary facility in Shreveport Air Force Base shut down while our backup facility was coming up. So I ran the command, I ran it wrong. And instead of doing a PS-EF piping it to grep and do a reboot to see what was rebooting, I just said PS-EF reboot. I didn't grep for the reboot. So I actually rebooted all of the servers. And so that was everybody's got one, right? I'm surprised I kept my job, but I think the important thing out of that was elevated privilege, knowing when to let go, when to not have privileges that you don't need, because this is the kind of stuff that happens, right? So I had to go do penance, explain why I was touching the keyboard. And I said, because I had the ability to.
It goes back to the know your role. I hate it when corporate speak, creeps into conversations like know your swim lane and everything. It's like, okay, look, if I did what they told me to do, which was my job, I'd be doing only one thing, but I do like 10 things, So I understand exactly where you're coming from when you say that, because going back to what you're saying, it's like access and command. I have access to a lot of different systems, with the contract that I actually have right now. But it's like, but do I need to use that, as an advantage or disadvantage? No. I mean, I use it for control, monitoring, and maintaining reasons, So if I have to go in there and tweak something and do some finger pushing, on the keys, I know exactly what it is that I'm doing. And I've got other people that know what's going on. So there's communication, and then, make sure everything's documented correctly. It's like, okay, before I hit enter, is everybody okay with this?
Yeah.
Does everybody know what they're doing? Just in case it blows up, this is what we're going to do, as a rollback plan, because I mean, in Linux, it's very unforgiving. Trust me, I know. I've been in the Linux community
It
forever.
will do exactly what you tell it to do.
It'll do it only what you tell it to do, no more, no less, and it will do exactly what you told it to do. No more, no less. And when I got my CCISP, I was working for the federal government, so it was like I didn't even have to have a sponsor. The government was like, okay, you're getting this. But one thing that I am seeing, and especially what Kim has brought up, and which is a very good point, is that my current position is ending and I'm looking for a new role. So I'm actually interviewing and looking around, and whatnot. And I'm literally calling our economy right now the white collar recession, because I mean it is unbelievable how many positions need to be filled, but what they're asking for and then what people have got are just the gap is unbelievable.
So,
So,
Chip,
for example, I'm a certified ethical hacker, pen tester, forensic investigator, and auditor. And they're like, well, you need to have a GPN or an OSCP. And I'm like, why? I've been doing this, 27 years. Why would I need to go get those certifications? Well, you have to have them for this role. But I'm like, but the role doesn't pay what you need for those certifications. Like if I got a CCISP and a, OSCP and a CII and a GPN and all this other kind of stuff, you're paying 100, and 20 something $1,000 when it needs to be higher than that for, the gap that you're asking for, just because of the certifications and the knowledge base and my experience that I bring, over a 30-year career doing this versus what you're asking for an entry level position.
Yeah, that's always the problem, right? And then to your point about the number of roles unfilled, I have a theory about that, right? 400 plus thousand roles in the U.S. alone
Correct.
unfilled for cybersecurity. How much of that is real? Because when you start poking at that, I mean, the number is still high. But when you start poking at how many trolling recs are out there that they never plan to hire for, how many requisitions are stale that just never got pulled, but they're filled, how many recs are out there just for whatever reason, what percentage of those are actually real jobs? And then, people out there that are trying to get in that get caught in that web of applying to things that never get a, response. And so that's frustrating. But, again, I think, to your point, we're at a space now. I always tell my folks that there's a bubble coming when it comes to cybersecurity of people that are actually doing jobs. And we're already starting to see that with AI starting to fill in with agentic systems that are able to do the lower level functions. Maybe the entry level position has been redefined now. What is entry level, right? Is entry level, it has to be a task that a system can't do. Right. Fundamentally, we're still in the nascent stages of agentic systems taking on these roles, but I only see that coming to fruition more and more. And eventually, the entry level position will have to be defined to something else.
And I'm seeing a lot of biases that are built into this, into AI. Let me give you an example. A little history lesson here. Most people don't remember when Microsoft created a chatbot called Tao. And when Tao was opened up and put onto the internet as a chatbot for people to use, of course the people from 4chan grabbed a hold of it and turned it completely racist, and they actually had to turn it off because it was anti-woman, anti-LGBTQIA, and and very, very, very racist, and they had to go in there and turn that system completely off. And I said, wow, that's something that we haven't really learned from in our new stuff that we're doing now, because there's a lot of .ai job finders that are out there now, and I'm permanently handicapped, I've lost half the vision in my left eye, due to me getting hit by a grenade in Afghanistan, and I've got a third of my leg that's missing. So I walk with a limp,
Wow.
so I've been shot, stabbed, run over, beat up, called names, and seen my intestines and stuff. I like, can we tuck that back in? Cause I kind of need that sewed in there.
No, Chip, God had a plan for you, man.
And, in 2015, hunting for a job was just putting your resume out there on LinkedIn or hitting up LinkedIn jobs and whatnot, or Glassdoor or Indeed. And then you got swamped with recruiters, that were basically committing fraud, and you were getting all, what I call mail bombed. You're getting 200 to 300 emails a day, for positions that's not even worth your time to even interview for. Right. So I'm seeing that now with a lot of the misinformation, the biases, and stuff that's actually being plugged into a lot of these job, chat bots. Because, well, sometimes people don't want to hire the handicapped, right? Sometimes people don't want to hire women. Some people don't want to hire people of color, and is that racial discrimination and sexism and all those things that we're seeing that are coming into some of these, large language models and stuff that's looking for, and weeding out people that's in the HR process. That's very interesting to kind of see, what's actually going on, because when Workday, which is one of the number one biggest, suppliers, of HR software, got hacked, all of that data got leaked out, and people started taking a look at it going, wow, their, placement bot, as they called it, isn't looking at, people, or, of Latino or, whatnot. It's skipping over those people and going to white males only. It was very interesting to see, because now they're getting hit with a class action lawsuit, which they should have been in the first place, for their data breach. So it's been kind of interesting to see how these things have kind of come out about how they're programming some of their systems. So what is your feeling on that, sir?
So Dario Amodei talks about interpretability, right? Being able to look into these large language models and see how they're processing, what is their chain of thought. And, humans built this. So
Right.
by virtue of humans building it, bias is going to be built in. How do you get rid of bias out of these machines? I don't know that that's even entirely possible. Now, the only way, I don't know. I don't know how to get it out of there, but I do believe that we have to be able to have humans in the loop as long as that is feasibly possible, because there's another school of thought that says at some point humans have to be out of the loop in order for us to be able to advance artificial intelligence to its super intelligence, plateau, the apex.
So in other words, you're talking about general artificial intelligence coming to what we call the singularity, problem.
There's AGI and then there's ASI, artificial super intelligence, right? So on the path to ASI, at some point humans become a bottleneck, right? But by then the bias is already in, and so now the models are building themselves and they're doing their own thinking and they're processing, but they still have foundational bias, right, from when it was from the inception. So I don't think that we're going to be able to get rid of it totally. Now, I'm really talking not as a expert in AI, but just from what I'm observing from my role of working with the technology is it's there. We have to be mindful of it. And as long as humans are in the loop, we have a responsibility to go back and again do some critical thinking when we get these outputs, and ask those questions. What is the chain of reasoning? How did it come to that decision? And be able to see that distinctly and be able to say, aha, this is a problem because in its decision tree, it did X, Y, and Z, which, demonstrates a level of bias that resulted in the answer that we got. So I think there's still that human oversight that needs to be exercised to be able to continue to mitigate. I don't know if we're going to be able to eliminate it.
Well,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Kim.
In my experience, people are only getting jobs now by knowing someone personally or occasionally. I saw that work that you did, right? So we need to have human beings looking at things. I hear that hiring managers aren't seeing anything. So you got all these people who are desperate for work. Sometimes they will use ChatGPT to automate all this because they're using on the other end. It's just madness. There needs to be We might never get back to a world where you walk into a store and you firm handshake and you got a job like the baby boomers benefited from. But we need to at least get back to like 2015 where hiring managers would see resumes.
Right.
Right. I agree. And, you know, I'm of the generation, I'm a man of a certain age, right? Where I remember my parents sitting around the table with the Sunday paper circulating classified ads about jobs. We're just not there anymore, right? And people are able to just at scale blast out tons of resumes. And I always tell people, I'm like, it's fine that you can apply for jobs at scale, but you've got to remember what you've done, especially when you're telling the large language model, tailor my resume for this job, tailor my resume for that. And the one time that you do get a hit, you've got to understand what lie you told somewhere, if you told a lie, right? Or which profile you told somebody something about. And so that's the challenge, right? You know, you apply all of these jobs at scale, and then you get a couple hits, and all of a sudden you've got to dial yourself back in and understand, how do I go and set this interview?
Also, scammers are taking advantage.
Oh,
Everyone that I've spoken to has said that if they look like they're looking for work, if they have the LinkedIn open for work thing on their profile image, they get messages from people who say that they're recruiters. Well, they're not even people, really. They're probably bots. But accounts that say that they're hiring, and they're like, oh, well, do you want an entry level position? Do you want an executive position? And they'll say that to anyone, not just like people who have an executive level kind of work background. And of course, like someone who's only ever made like $20 an hour is going to hear executive position, and then you get all excited, right?
That's me.
And then like, okay, and then show me your resume, and then you paste your resume into the chat, and they're like, well, you see, there's a problem with your resume. You're not using the right resume methodology to overcome what's the name of the system? There's an acronym for the system that people use to process resumes, but it's not compliant with that. I'm going to show you how to fix your resume. And as I think we mentioned this last week, no legitimate recruiter, no employer, it's not an employer's job to fix your resume.
Correct.
Right? So that's the first problem. That should be the first
that's your first red flag. And Kim knows that I wrote about this because, I mean, I experienced this, you know, and the shortest and the long was I was caught in this situation, right? And they said, well, you need to rewrite your resume for the AI, our internal AI. And you need to go to Fiverr to Betty rewrites resumes.ai. And I was like, that's a scam, but I'm going to go down this rabbit hole to see how far it actually goes. And what happened was I ended up taking screenshots and logs and everything. And I called the company up and I said, you know, hey, here is all the information, screenshots, logs, data, everything from my firewall. You have someone that literally took some clip art, you know, that from Getty Images and made a profile that copied your HR director. You know, and they're like, well, we just found out about that because we have people calling in asking for when's their interview going to be, and they're not posting any jobs or interviews for those positions in that department. So, I mean, it was completely fabricated. So I was like, okay, there's fraud here. Let's see what's going on, because this is where my little
John David just posted a thing in there about somebody he knew that posted that they use AI to write their resume to fit the job posting, and they last about a week, and they had to call him out on it because he couldn't perform anything that he put in his resume.
That's right. So I was kind of like going, okay, this is all fake, and I ended up turning those logs over to the Justice Department and the U.S. Marshals. Well, last week, little update on this was that they actually found out that this was a server and rack servers that were in a storage facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they had basically scammed, you know, these people. There are about 7,000 people that they had scammed for between $150 to $400 to have their resume rewritten for an AI. But the money was actually going to Myanmar, Burma, and, you know, parts of Singapore. And they were going into crypto coin, and they were basically losing their money. So
Wow.
I turned that over to the DOJ and the Justice Department. They actually had a subpoena that was registered, and they actually texted me, and sent me pictures of where they had busted into this, where they were stealing power and internet off the pole, going into a storage container to where it was just rack servers that were there just collecting data and then sending that overseas, and they were just laundering the money.
Wow. Well, congratulations for reporting that. Good job.
Yes.
And also, it's amazing that they got that specific, tracing the instigator.
Well, I gave them everything. I'm like, here's where it all goes. Here's the Google Maps, here's everything that's geolocated. I mean, Linux doesn't lie, Kali Linux really doesn't lie, so, once I got all that information and just followed the chain of command and custody of command of how I got all the information, filed the reports, and then sent that off, and they actually came to my house. I mean, the U.S. Marshals came to my house. I took Mr. Laptop that's behind me, sat down with him, went through everything. I said, here it all is on a USB drive. Take it and do as thy will, which is the whole of the law. So I gave that to them, and it took them about a week and a half. But I mean, this was committed about 12 different felonies, right off the top of my head.
Oh,
so
what I tell people too, Chip and Kim, is when people come to my site and they talk about how you mentor me to get into cybersecurity, and the first thing they talk about is, can you review my resume? I'm like, I'm very transparent. I'm never going to charge anybody to review their resume, because the first thing out of my mouth is, you should be able to review your own resume using AI tools, right? You should be able to conduct what I call mock interviews, right? If you already have a ChatGPT account, or you have a Notebook LM through Google, you can prep yourself pretty much on your own. Anybody that's approaching you and charging you a huge amount of money to review your resume or to rewrite your resume is probably just taking you for your money. Because if you just put a little bit of effort behind it, you'll get a better product, because you better than somebody else does.
Right.
So I always tell people, use tools that you have available to you, and try never to pay somebody to do something that you can do yourself. And especially, we've got tools today that can do it for you in minutes, and they can iterate on it. I mean, literally put the job description in, put your resume in, and do a comparison, and then generate a new resume, right? And then review it.
Yeah, I remember the day they added spell check to Word, in Word 97. I thought that was the greatest thing ever made. I was like, wow, it caught all my grammatical errors and spacings and stuff like that. Man, the world's going to change, And then Grammarly came along, right? And then, all of these resume. And I'm like going, I have students all the time from, universities that I used to speak at. I said, like, just send me your resume. I'll take a look at it. Hit me up online. You want to talk about your career, what you want to do. It costs me nothing. It costs none of my time. I have no problem giving you 10 minutes of my time. Like today I had somebody ask me going, hey, I'm looking for jobs in Latin America. What should I do? And I'm like, well, look for about 10 to 15 companies in Latin America that you think are good companies, and look at agencies, recruiting and hiring agencies in Latin America. Here's a couple of them that I know of, and just start looking around, start your recon early. He's like, well, I've got about 6 months before I graduate. I'm like, well, then you need to start looking now. He's like, can you review my resume? I said, sure, send it to me. And I said, okay, take this off, change this, reword this correctly, and then you go from there. And I'm like you, I worked with tons of different students. I've also worked with people that have had felony records, people that are getting out of jail, people that are very disproportionate, coming out because, they were somehow involved in something, and they were put in jail for a year, 2 years, and nobody that's a felony conviction. But I've worked with convicts before, like, they're like, look, you're not going to be, the chief technology officer of a bank. I hate to tell you this, they're not going to.
Yeah.
If I was making a hiring decision, quite honestly, I would not hold small scale drug dealing against.
No, yeah, and that's the thing, is that in the state that I'm in, marijuana is not illegal. It's medicinal. You can get a little medical card, and there you go. So, like, I don't even look at that, because as I tell people that come into my red team that I run, no one gets into this position without a little bit of villainy in their past. I mean, that's just part of the job, Our job is to think like really bad people and think of really bad things to do. So,
just think about all the brilliant people out there who are not in positions that make good use of their talents because they sold a little bit of weed 10 years ago.
Yeah. Or they got busted in a shoplifting, thing that they didn't even know that they were a part of, So, I work with a lot of
context is everything.
Yeah, I work with youth, that have, they're troubled youth, and a lot of it's social economic, a lot of it's social, a lot of this economics that is based in their family units broken, and they're trying to get, as I could say, they're trying to get out of the trailer park. Why? Because I've been that kid. I grew up poor, very, very, very poor, and and I really see that, like myself, when I was in 8th grade, I looked at that Apple IIe and I said, "This is the future."
One YouTuber I've gotten into recently, his name is Gary Stevenson, and he's like a young economist, and he talks about his life story and about how when he was a teenager, he was kicked out of like the British equivalent of high school for dealing in marijuana. And he went to the London School of Economics after that, and then the rest was history. But imagine if he went to prison for marijuana and wasn't given the opportunity to like get out and go to school and do the things that he did with his career.
Yeah, present condition doesn't predict future success, right?
Absolutely.
It shouldn't.
And I always look at it like, how can we do better, in our community? How can we do better in this workspace, right? Everything that we're talking about today, how AI is changing the game, how work placement's been changed, definitely has been impacted, and education, because education's everything. And I know that you as a professor, you push that. And I mean, even when I was teaching part-time, it's like, look, you're here for a reason and you got here for a reason. Now, what is that reason? And how do we define that into what you want to do in the future? Right.
Yeah.
And I've seen some of my students do good, and have had very good success stories. And I have one of my students that's pulling a 27 to 5, in federal prison for identity theft. So this could be used for good or ill. What you learn, it's the implementation of how you use it. And that's how I see AI right now. With
I agree. I say AI is one of those things. I hate to put it this way, but stupid in, stupid out, right?
Oh yeah.
If you're not good at prompting, or if you don't take the time to be good at prompting, you're going to get unreliable results. And I tell people, and I laugh because I was a humanities student in high school. I studied arts, I studied literature, poetry, all that stuff. I thought I was going to be a musician and an entertainer when I got out of high school, and I was none of those things. But the one thing I don't regret is taking all those classes, because precision in language is so important in prompting. And I found that that's become very useful for me. So the folks out there that have liberal arts degrees that are, majoring in language and like majoring in English, that's a leg up when you talk about prompt engineering and being able to do good prompting.
Yeah, I speak in phonetics. My wife hates it because, I speak in syntax, and she's like, "Why do you use /dot?" I'm like, "Well, honey, that's how I learned all this stuff and everything." She goes, "Well, yeah," and she's not from the United States, and her language and my language sometimes kind of hits, because I mean, she's Israeli, I'm from the United States, and some of their words and our words don't even exist. Like in baseball, like there's no words in baseball, in Hebrew. So it's kind of interesting. Sometimes we run into crazy things, but syntax and context means everything, right?
Yeah.
And Mr. Allen, I know that you totally agree with that. But so I want to speak about community development and some of the stuff that you've been working on, not only within education, but ethics and policy, and some of the shared responsibility that you have with your end-to-end users, and what kind of role that is that you're playing right now, and like, where do you want to be within the next 30, 60, 90 days, year from now?
So right now, or previous to now, I've been doing a lot of work with policy and strategy with our cleared teams. And now that AI has found its way into our environments, I'm always one running a little bit ahead to say what's coming around the bend. I don't want to lean too far and be, accused of being a futurist, an idealist, or, looking at things that aren't real. But when when you think back in time, when new technologies came along, anybody that was leaning in was always viewed as being, idealist or futurist and not dealing in the real right now. But the way this technology is moving so fast and it's coming at us into our areas, I'm always encouraging my team to always be learning, right? I've actually volunteered to be a part of ISACA's AAISM, the first certification, one of the first certifications for artificial intelligence. And I think it's important to have been participating in that cohort and helping develop that testing that's coming along here, so people can understand that, you need to understand this technology when it shows up in your environment and understand how it works and how to use it. And I think being certified kind of, answers the mail on I understand it. Whether you or not you take the test and you pass it, just being able to say that I actually went through the training and I understand the principles and the concepts of, as you put it, Chip, what's the difference between a generative AI system and artificial general intelligence and artificial super intelligence, and what does that all mean? Chain of thought, learning the vernacular, learning and being able to speak intelligently about the technology is hugely important because it's only going to become more and more prevalent. So when I'm, talking to people in the community, whether I'm wearing my L3 Harris hat or I'm wearing my my volunteer hat, my LLC, I'm always saying, always be learning because things are moving so fast. And if you want to find opportunities is in knowledge.
Right. And the Silicon Valley for the longest time is, the move fast and break things, right? And with AI, you got to do that a little bit differently. As I tell people, you want to move fast, but you really don't want to break it. You want to improve it, So that's how I've always kind of termed it because, you're dealing with something that's a tool and it's in its infancy stages, right? And it's like a 5-year-old with an Uzi. Somebody's going to get shot and hurt. It's not a good idea to do it, but if you give them a loaded gun, I mean, it's going to go crazy here. But and I see that that model changing, which is good. It's like let's have a little bit more of the human in the loop because the thing that scares me the most, because I'm old school that way. You remember Buck Rogers? Most people don't remember the Buck Rogers TV show, but you used to have these little circles, right, that were on the chest of some of the robots, and all the robots would get together and they would decide, what would the sun look like when it sets that day? Does it need to rain over here? And they would all talk to each other, but there was no human, like you said, in the loop. They were all, it was a logical discussion on how everything was going to work to make the humans happy and to appease the humans and to keep them docile versus, super aggressive and so forth. So it was very interesting to see some of the stuff that I saw on TV shows as science fiction now becoming a reality.
So it's really great having you on here. Should I call you Professor Wesley or Mr.
No, just call me Alan, please.
Okay.
Please call me Alan.
I was raised by, an Englishman who was born in the first half of the 20th century. So I guess some of his upbringing is still stuck on me. Sir, ma'am, that kind of stuff.
No, Alan's perfect. And I thank you, Kim, and thank you, Chip, for having me on this inaugural show. I hope I met your expectation, and I had a really, really good time being here, sharing information back and forth with you.
Yes, sir. It's been an absolute pleasure. First off, I'd also like to thank our sponsors, today, which is Secure Nation, to make this actually happen today. And definitely, we welcome you to the show at any time, sir, to talk about anything that is that you want to talk about or bring to our attention. So we're going to go ahead and start going ahead and wrapping it up for the day. But there are some things that that we're actually going to hopefully engage you with in the future. Mr. Wesley, and definitely we all need some more.
We were sponsored by Secure Nation, but if PepsiCo also wants to sponsor, I would be a happy. It was good enough for Britney Spears and Michael Jackson. I could take a Pepsi.
I'll take some Starbucks money.
There you go.
Keep buying that $5 water. Come on. Yeah.